This episode is brought to you by MeUndies. Underwear drawers are like the Wild West. You never know what you're going to pull out or what shape it's in. So upgrade your collection with the buttery soft comfort of MeUndies. MeUndies' signature fabric is as soft as a warm hug from your favorite sweater. Plus, it's breathable and oh so comfy, making it ideal for all-day wear. Get 20% off your first order, plus free shipping at MeUndies.com/Spotify with code SPOTIFY. That's MeUndies.com/Spotify, code SPOTIFY.
Super Bowl 59 is in the books, and the Philadelphia Eagles are your new Super Bowl champions. They routed the reigning and defending champion Kansas City Chiefs in a stunning win by 40 points to 22. It was the Chiefs who came into this game with all the talk of history around them, trying to go back to back to back, do what no team in the Super Bowl era has done before them, and win 3 straight Lombardi trophies. That didn't happen because they were dominated on both sides of the ball by the Philadelphia Eagles. The Chiefs got within 1 step of immortality. The Eagles snatched it from them. It's the Philadelphia Eagles that reign supreme when it's all said and done. So let's take a look back at the key turning points of the game with Charles Dagnall as we review Super Bowl 59.
Graves on Gridiron with Richard Graves.
Hello, welcome along to the show. This is Graves on Gridiron with your Super Bowl review special. I am your host, Richard Graves. If you're watching on YouTube, you will see a man that looks like he's taken more hits than Patrick Mahomes in the face of that Philadelphia Eagles pass rush. Charles Dagnall, Daggers, it's great to see you, I think.
It is great to see you as well. I won't go on about the illness I've just had over the last week or so. I've just returned from Malaysia at the Under-19 Women's T20 World Cup. Great competition won by India. A fabulous country, very accommodating people. But I came back with an illness. I wasn't quite sure what it was, Rich. I had to go to hospital and have blood tests and all of this sort of thing. I thought it was malaria or dengue fever. It sounds very exotic.
But had you gone to Google Doctor?
Yeah, I did. I put all of the symptoms in, and then the location where I was. Obviously, we're 100 miles from the equator, so I'm thinking it could be anything. And mosquito bites a go-go along the arm, and I'm thinking this is the end for Daggers. Anyway, as it turned out, a viral infection, and starting to get back on form, and then off to India in a couple of days now for the WPL. So what a boon it is to have this time with you in the interim.
Well, I am grateful. It might never have happened, but I've always said, Daggers, you're a fighter, a little trooper, and you've pulled through, which is fantastic to see. And I'm assuming, therefore, managed to make it through Super Bowl 49, which, if you listen to our preview show last week with American sports broadcaster Bob Sturm, we gave you 3 picks. I'm not going to lie, 2 of those weren't very good because largely we rode off the Philadelphia Eagles. However, we went 1 and 2 on the line. That means in the postseason, 8-6-1. That's a winning record. I'm going to take it. But before I give my opinion on what we saw in New Orleans at the Caesars Superdome, Daggers, what was your take on how Super Bowl 59 unfolded and that we now have new Super Bowl champions in the Philadelphia Eagles?
Well, I got a text message from a pal of mine, and he likes a little flutter, and not in a big way, just a small flutter. And he said, I'm going to watch this tonight, mate. What do you fancy? And he says, you know the game a little bit. And I said, yeah, I like to think I do. Yeah.
Did you tell him you were a Bucs fan?
I did tell him. He knows I'm a Bucs fan. He's a Rams fan, actually. He supports the Rams, but he doesn't look at it as closely as say we do. And I thought, well, I'm glad he's asked me because I'm fairly confident that I can give him some good advice, steer him the right way. And I just text him back, going, should be a good one. I'm going KC by 3. Anyway, I've not heard from him so far today, and whether I will again. He's a golfing partner. I don't think he'll be inviting me down to his anytime soon. Look, this is a weird one, Richard. I don't know how much, and you do this every single week, and I love coming on and chatting with you, and we discuss and shoot the breeze about a variety of different predictions. But a lot of the time, you are in a balance of head versus heart. And everything in my head said the way that Kansas City have won this year, what was it, 12 one-score games that and 12 comeback
12 one-score games they've come out on top in a row this year.
Yeah.
That streak was 17. Their last 17 one-score games they'd won. Unprecedented.
12 of them coming from behind. And so you think, well, there's something in that because that's experience. That is a championship team who may not be playing to their fullest potential, but they are churning out victories. And so they're that is pedigree for you in a championship team. You don't do that by, not knowing what you're doing. But then when you look at it player for player and roster for roster, and then I look at the skill position players from the Philadelphia Eagles. I look at that huge, ginormous offensive line. You've got a running back who's gone for 2,000 yards. You've got A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith on either side. You have Dallas Goedert. You've got a defense under Vic Fangio, which has made brilliant strides with great additions and great drafting in the off-season and by Harry Roseman. And I actually look at them, and if you're listening to your head, the Philadelphia Eagles win that game. But all of me goes back to, they're champions for a reason. So that's where I was sort of leaning towards. If anyone knows how to get past a side as loaded as the Philadelphia Eagles, it would be the Kansas City Chiefs. But there was just simply no answers. I was actually taken aback. At the end of the first quarter, I'm thinking, I don't know where Kansas are getting a yard here. I don't know. The Mahomes looked jittery behind that offensive line, which was getting battered by the defensive front of Philadelphia, which led by Josh Sweat, which I was staggered that he wasn't Super Bowl MVP personally. I thought he was such a disruption. So I was sort of just sat a little open-mouthed, to be perfectly honest, for the first quarter at least, and then just thinking, I don't see any way back.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you there, Daggers. I think it's obviously indicative of the way the modern day game is that Jalen Hurts was named the Super Bowl MVP, but anyone, frankly, on the defensive side of the ball for the Eagles, I wouldn't have argued with. I think they were that impressive. In the entire game, they didn't blitz Mahomes once. They just rushed 42 snaps, 42 times they just rushed 4, no blitzes. I think Mahomes was jittery long before halftime. He didn't trust his offensive lineman to block. That showed in how quickly he was looking to get out of dodge behind them and wasn't keeping his eyes downfield. And perhaps the most astonishing statistic that I don't care who you are, I don't think you could have seen this coming, was that at halftime, the Eagles led 24-0 and total offensive yards in that first half for the Kansas City Chiefs was just 23. An unreal performance. And that was with throwing in that early interception as well from Jalen Hurts. They overcame that. Their defense, they just raced all over the field, swarmed to the ball, got 2 picks, pick 6 for Cooper DeJean. It just a phenomenal all-round performance. And this game was over by midway through the third quarter. We've seen some tremendous spirit and comebacks and overcoming the odds from Mahomes in all sorts of situations, but there was no coming back from this. And that was the astonishing thing, because we've become trained to believe that you never ride off Mahomes, you never ride off the Chiefs. But a little bit like Super Bowl 55 against the Buccaneers, there was a point in that third quarter when you knew the race was run and this game was over.
I was going to ask you and your thoughts on this, and you mentioned about Super Bowl 55, and who am I to complain about any Tampa Bay bringing up in the conversation and their success, but it was slightly different in that Todd Bowles had created a variety of different packages of blitzing to throw Mahomes off his game, coming from all sorts. And he was obviously a little bit more inexperienced than he is right now. That 4-man front of Philadelphia and how disruptive they were, not one blitz as well, Vic Fangio, and that just shows you the strength that they have up front, led Jalen Carter, Josh Sweat. But have you ever seen Patrick Mahomes in a state of flux like that, from a decision-making perspective? Usually he's got an outlet somewhere. It just felt as though he was a little foggy.
Yeah, and here's the thing. You go back to Super Bowl 55, and Mahomes was still able to scramble out of the pocket, pull off some unreal throws from all sorts of angles, which his receivers couldn't hold on to. But at least there was something there. Last night, there was nothing until the game was done, and he's throwing deep balls down the field and finding Xavier Worthy for some garbage time touchdown scores. There was nothing when it actually mattered last night. That's what's so impressive about the Philadelphia Eagles' performance. And that's what threw me as well, because my reservation was we'd seen against Washington in the NFC Championship game, against the Rams, less so against the Packers in the wildcard round. But the offense didn't really click. I know they put 55 on the board against Washington. Eagles fans will be in uproar at this point. But there were still moments in that game when, but for turnovers, the Commanders, you could see a way for them until they turned the ball over and the Eagles pulled away. Last night, it was a complete blanket shutdown of the Kansas City Chiefs. And this is a team on the precipice of history, going back to back to back. You don't get there by chance. You are a talented unit. You know how to get the job done in the most pressurized situation. And yet, into town came Nick Sirianni and his Philadelphia Eagles team, both sides of the ball. Not today, not on our watch, not in this house. That's what was impressive.
There's the other elements as well of that Philadelphia defense. And arguably, some would say about the signings of Cooper DeJean, and you've got C.J. Gardner-Johnson, and you've really developed that secondary. But I would argue that Zach Bourne, the middle linebacker for the Philadelphia Eagles, I mean, he's come from I wouldn't say obscurity, but, this was a guy who used to be rushing the passer. They've developed him into a middle linebacker and has had an all-pro season marshalling that defense and is everywhere. He is literally everywhere. And his reading of the game, that has been, maybe it's not unsung, people have been talking about him, but not to the degree of others. And I just think that as a whole, on both sides of the ball, I don't remember seeing a side where there's usually you find a little weakness here due to the things like the salary cap. For as superstar loaded offense as you have, you look at the Cincinnati Bengals, they've got an absolutely atrocious defense, save Trey Hendrickson. You've got an area within that clubhouse which needs a little bit of work. I look at that Philadelphia Eagles side and cannot think of a potential area of improvement, which is a kind of scary thought when it
Well, I tell you what, and again, this bears testament to the standard of play. I had felt that when C.J. Gardner-Johnson wasn't on the field in that secondary, this was a defensive secondary that could be got at. We saw it towards the end of the regular season when he was ejected from the game against the Commanders, and suddenly Jaden Daniels is flinging the ball all over the field, and they come from behind to get the win. C.J. Gardner-Johnson, love him or hate him, and there's no in-between with him. He does divide opinion. When he is on the field, he brings an edge and an attitude that just lends itself to this Eagles defense. And you refer to Zach Bourne and say, well, it wasn't a nobody. There aren't many people, if you say to them, where was Zach Bourne playing before he came to Philadelphia? Even I've had to look at several times, and I knew. And the way he's complimented Cooper DeJean in the middle of that field as well, it's been fantastic. And then you flip it onto the offensive side of the ball. What was all the talk coming into this game? Can the Chiefs defense stop Saquon Barkley? Saquon Barkley is what makes this Eagles offense tick. And if you stop him, you stop them. Well, I tell you what, the Kansas City Chiefs defense stopped Saquon Barkley last night. He didn't get over 100 rushing yards. He didn't find pay dirt. He didn't get to the end zone and score a touchdown. And yet there's Jalen Hurts, and I've been one of his biggest critics, standing in the pocket, making throws. He was accurate. A.J. Brown steps up. Devontae Smith steps up, and they score touchdowns. And then you've got Hurts making plays with his legs as well, just when the Chiefs defense had made some moves to try and adapt to what they were seeing in front of them. Both sides of the ball, this was a hugely impressive performance, and I really don't think it can be understated.
I totally agree. And with that, and almost the season of Barkley has provided the threat for the Super Bowl, because they did defend him beautifully. I think he was only restricted to about 57 yards, something like that on the ground. But because of that, something has to give elsewhere, and that allows that either split second of extra time for Jalen Hurts to throw the ball, or for your receivers to be defended that little bit less. And when they are elite, as another one is Devonta Smith. Now, I know he was drafted in the first round. AJ Brown is your big star.
By the way, what a throw, what a grab.
Oh, sensational. I mean, dropping it in the bucket, look it up
on
in
a
the
dime.
dictionary, and that is what you will see. I mean, what did tickle me, I was watching, was when that first penalty flag was thrown for the offensive pass interference.
That was an awful flag, by the way.
And all of the things that get said, oh, Kansas City have got the refs in their pocket and all of that. You're just going, oh, don't be one of those. Don't be, because we have seen some pretty average calls, when involving the Kansas City Chiefs. The Eagles got one back, another fairly poor.
It was Nick Bolton, wasn't it, on Jalen Hurts? And at that point, I actually texted a friend and said, I hope the officials aren't going to ruin this game. Yeah, at that point, it's evened up one each, but they're both really ticky-tacky calls.
But they were, and I was glad that actually sort of pretty much from there, they let the players play.
Yeah.
But it was just that the threat of Barkley opened up so many different more avenues for the Philadelphia Eagles. And, if you are trying to isolate AJ Brown or Devonta Smith, who again is another one of these unheralded players. He's not the star that AJ Brown is. He's not the one with the book reading inner excellence on the
People forget though, he's still a first-round pick.
He's a first-round pick. He's an elite wide receiver and a wonderful compliment for Brown as well. It's not just necessarily getting the best receiver out of college. It's the one who fits your system. It's the one who fits across from the other side. And again, I know these are platitudes, and this is not easy as a Bucs fan to actually give platitudes to the Philadelphia Eagles. But it's very difficult to give them their flowers, or not to give them their flowers, given how fabulously they played across the board. Everyone came to play. Every single man came to play. The coaching was sensational, and you can't help but say they thoroughly deserved the rewards at the end.
Yeah, and how many times have we seen blowouts really in recent Super Bowls? It was one-sided, like I say, Super Bowl 55, but in recent years, most have been tight games. And you look to these two teams coming into Super Bowl 59, and I absolutely expect it to be another one. I think the odds makers were right on the money, 1.5 points. Whether you could validate the Chiefs on paper being 1.5 point favorites or not is another thing entirely. I said last week that on paper, man for man, the two rosters put side by side, the Eagles were the better outfit. But it's Patrick Mahomes, it's the Chiefs. I get it. And yet, whether you want to subscribe to this idea that revenge was in the air, whatever you want to go down, the Eagles came in New Orleans and they played absolutely the game of their lives on the biggest stage. And that's the sign of a champion. And they thoroughly deserve the win.
They always say as well about how difficult it is to repeat. Now, Kansas City did it last year, and it's the hardest thing in sport. Winning it is not the hardest thing. It's actually repeating the feat the following year. Because within any team environment, it is that hunger that drives you. And Philadelphia getting close a couple of years back, this has been culmination of factors over the last 2 or 3 years. And that hunger drives you. When you have already done it, and especially done it back to back, that hunger is not necessarily the same. They will say in any press conference, stick a microphone in front of them, and they will say they are just as hungry as they were. But when you have done it, it is not the same as when you do it for the first time. So there is always an element, and I don't care what people say about the sports psychology of it. It is a fact that once you have done it, there is a release and there is a pressure off now that is different to when those who haven't had it want it for the first time.
Absolutely.
And that hunger played itself, or bore itself out.
Well, and it was perhaps fitting, wasn't it, at the end, once the Lombardi Trophy had been handed over, the Rocky music hits in the Caesars Superdome. It's Philadelphia. It just all fitted together. What I did find interesting was there was clearly and very obviously a glazed look on the Kansas City Chiefs sideline. The players sat on the benches. They were not expecting this to unfold in this fashion. Patrick Mahomes gets sacked 6 times in the game. He's never been sacked more than 5 times in a game in his NFL career. 2 of those 3 occasions came this year, which I find interesting and something to perhaps watch as a talking point coming through the offseason. DeAndre Hopkins, the veteran wide receiver, is clearly not going to be there come next season. Lots of question marks around the future of Travis Kelce. Both Kelce and Mahomes, very non-committal and going out of their way, actually, to be so, both pre and post-game. For what it's worth, I will not be at all surprised if actually we've seen the end for Travis Kelce this time round. Patrick Mahomes talks about the grind of getting yourself in shape, getting yourself back to the Super Bowl, and saying it's not easy. And if these things start to come to pass, then this is where you need a bit of a changing of the guard. And it becomes apt for me to ask the question, how do the Kansas City Chiefs bounce back from this? It's one of the great qualities of Sir Alex Ferguson at Manchester United, the way he was able to rotate personnel in and out of the club and yet still reinvent the team to go and win the Premier League title and Champions Leagues time after time again. The question now becomes the Kansas City Chiefs. We know all about Patrick Mahomes. We know he's only 29 years old and he's already been to 5 Super Bowls. We know what Andy Reid is capable of, but are they as an organization now capable of reinventing this roster to ensure they are still competitive? They're still the standard bearers in the AFC.
Well, answer your own question. Do you think they are?
I have to say yes, because I have that much respect for what I've seen from Andy Reid, not just at Kansas City, but at the job he did over many years at Philadelphia. And I would argue that he was unfortunate not to win a Lombardi with the Eagles. He's already been the head coach of the Kansas City Chiefs for a decade. Yeah. So this isn't by perchance. He's won 3 Super Bowls in that time. And make no mistake, it's not the same group of players that's won each Lombardi trophy from Super Bowl 54 to 58. He's got as an organization, they've drafted well. They've made tough decisions when people have raised eyebrows. I think Tyreek Hill being traded away to the Miami Dolphins is perhaps the biggest of all of them. So, yeah, absolutely he can. But I think for the playing personnel as well, the manner of that defeat last night, shock to the system, it's a big moment for all of them now.
I am in agreement with you. And if there is a coach within the NFL that knows how to regenerate a side, it will be Andy Reid. He's been around for a long, long time. I think that's the spectre of those head coaches, the great head coaches who have won multiple Super Bowls. And Andy Reid is in that sort of bracket. Not many can turn around and do what someone like Bill Belichick has done. But you want to be spoken about, I think, within the same kind of breath. Fresh blood always reinvigorates a side. Maybe even a sort of change of style, depending on who that fresh blood is, can also sort of light a fire under Patrick Mahomes as well. And I think, at 29, everything is very raw at the end of a defeat such as this for a great championship side. But you've also, like you said about Alex Ferguson, there was no one better to sort of stop something or remove something, even though it was successful. He knew when it was almost before it was going to be not successful, he made that change. And I think that's what Andy Reid in Kansas City have the opportunity to do now. There is still some very, very talented, you look at Rashee Rice, I know he was injured, but he's a young receiver with a huge amount of talent, Xavier Worthy. I was
that in itself lends itself to a change in offensive philosophy if they can get the offensive line sorted.
And then that is, I think, where Kansas City have to go. Defensively, they've had a very good season, Kansas City. So I don't think there's a huge amount of worries there. But you keep Patrick Mahomes upright, or even upright for a split second longer, he makes things happen. And I think, if he has weapons to go with. I was disappointed, actually, Kansas City didn't run the ball earlier in the, they were quite pass heavy in the first couple of drives, and I know they went 3 and out a couple of times, and eventually.
Well, I've got a theory about this. I do think their philosophy was, if we get the ball out of Mahomes' hands quickly to our playmakers that can make people miss, then we can use the pass to set up the run. The problem was, I think in 2 of their first 3 drives, they went 3 and out.
Yeah. And that is the danger, especially when you've got to know what you're up against. I would always like to see the run attempt to be established. And that is something that I think they tried to do at the start of the second half. And I think it was the start of the second half. Pacheco had a 6-yard run, and you think, well, that's a good positive start to a drive. That's exactly. And then they got a holding call, I think it was, which set them back. So obviously you're in passing situations, but it was the setting the stall out with a very, very tidy running back in Isaiah Pacheco, and you got Kareem Hunt as a nice fallback as well. So the 1-2 punch is pretty reasonable, but I think they abandoned it very, very quickly. Pass to set up the run, I am just one of those old school people that I prefer the run to set up the pass. And I think if you can establish that, then defenses start to get worried, and they also start to get tired more quickly defending the run than they do the pass. Anyway, be that as it may, I think Kansas City have traditionally drafted very well. It is time to cut the dead wood. Sounds far too harsh for a very, very talented group of players. You look at the career that D-Hop's had. You look at the career that Travis Kelce's had. But it's time now. It is time to bring in some fresh blood, reinvigorate. Your main guy is Patrick Mahomes. He's 10 years, $450 million contract, or whatever it was. He is the guy you are building the next decade around. Whatever he decides to do, you've got to assume that he's going to be your guy. So how are we going to light the fire under him? And I think it's bringing in exciting, talented new weapons that can also get in a couple of people that can keep him upright.
Yeah, first and foremost, you've got to protect the face of the franchise, haven't you? So you need to strengthen the offensive line. We'll close by looking at the reigning Super Bowl champions now. Enough about the Chiefs. They lost this game. How well set going forward are the Eagles? It's a question I was asked when I was doing some broadcast work earlier today. Are the Eagles now here to stay? I think we've been spoilt a little bit by the Kansas City Chiefs, and people are like, well, the Eagles are now the heir apparents. It's really difficult just to get back to the Super Bowl.
Yes.
They've been brilliant this season, but it's only 4 years ago. They were fresh off a 4-win season and bottom of the NFC East. So things can change quickly in the NFL.
Yes, they can. And it was interesting. Do you remember the season that they had after the Super Bowl defeat? And I think they went 10-0. They started the season 10-0. It was almost like the worst 10-0 team. Nothing was, but they were still churning out victories, and it sort of fell a little bit flat. There was a few injuries here and there. And who'd have thought, looking back from last season to this, that the season that Saquon's had, the season that Derrick Henry had, and the running back is now fashionable again.
Well, I tell you what, that 3-year, $37 million deal that the Eagles shelled out for Saquon's looking money well spent now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pocket change for them, and the way it couldn't have worked out better for either franchise, really. And I think that, of course, it's in the rawness of the moment. I look at that side yesterday and think, where the hell is the weakness? Where is that weakness? I don't see it defensively. I see quite a young defensive unit, which is encouraging for the Philadelphia Eagles. I think there is an argument to say there is a few more teams within the NFC that can. I was encouraged by a lot of teams in the NFC.
Was that the Dallas Cowboys I heard you mention there, Daggers?
The Dallas Cowboys, of course, were right at the top of that list, Richard. But I'm just looking forward to when Ashton Gianti gets drafted by the Dallas Cowboys. That's for another day.
Let's not go there just yet.
That's for another day. But I think it is, of course, very, very stiff to go and repeat. Are their rosters as loaded as Philadelphia if they can keep hold of as many of them as they can? And keeping hold of that offensive line it's so dominant. You are going to be in the mix. But I think the NFC next year will definitely go through Philadelphia. I find it very difficult. As exciting as Jaden Daniels and the Washington Commanders are, as fun as the Detroit Lions are, and who's to say when Aiden Hutchinson gets back and they maybe draft another edge rusher this year. I think there are sides that will threaten. I really do.
Yeah. But is that not the beauty of the NFL, Daggers? Because
it totally
you would assume, at the time of recording, we haven't heard anything yet, but you'd assume that Kellen Moore, the offensive coordinator, will stay in New Orleans and become their new head coach. There'll be veterans on this team that move on to pastures new. There'll be a rookie draft class to come in, obviously, in April. And if anybody ever needed any statistic to highlight just how quickly the NFL changes, people were talking about players that were on both these rosters 2 years ago in the meeting in Super Bowl 57. I think it was 12 players on the Philadelphia Eagles played in that game, and 15 from the Kansas City Chiefs. These are 53-man rosters.
Yeah.
Things change quickly. So the one thing I would say to Eagles players, coaches, fans alike, I'm sure they don't need me to say this to them, but enjoy it now because it is thoroughly well earned. They were and are the best team in the NFL this season, and things change quickly. It might not seem so right now as we're saying who can beat this team as loaded as they are, but we all know, anybody that's watched the National Football League for any period of time knows how quickly that rug can be pulled from under your feet. So they deserve this because they were phenomenal in Super Bowl 59.
Feel a bit sad now. It's all done. It's all done for
another
year. And,
but as Jeff Reinbold always tells us, Daggers, there is no off-season.
Well, we've got free agency and we've got the draft, and the draft is my favourite thing in the world. And I would not class myself as an expert at all, but I just find it, I just find the whole event thrilling and exciting. And because of the optimism the draft gives, every single fan thinks that their draft selection might change their fortunes for the forthcoming season. And so there's plenty to look forward to, but September does feel a long way away.
It does, but it does mean we can have a little bit of a break before free agency kicks in. Second week in March, the new NFL year starts. Obviously, we're always around on social media, be it Richard Graves, RDG Media on Facebook, at Richard Graves 1 on X, rdgmediauk.com. Sorry, I can't even get it right myself, Daggers. rdgmedia.uk is the website as well, and RDG Media UK on Instagram. Obviously, people will be very concerned for your welfare and will want to stay abreast of it. Daggers, where can they keep up to date with your happenings and where you are in the world?
Well, I just wanted to give you a cough for effect there, so my apologies.
It was appreciated.
But they can find me at Charles Dagnall on Insta or on X. Looking forward to heading out to India on Wednesday. That'll be on Sky Sports, the WPL. Brilliant women's cricket tournament. Really looking forward to that. And then we've got a summer of cricket to look forward to, Rich, as well, where we're going to be catching up, no doubt.
Absolutely.
In warm climes. Let's hope that...
Maybe a bit of golf as well, Daggers.
Oh, that would be lovely. And you can tell me all about the fortunes of the Dallas Cowboys and how they're going to run the table in the NFC East next year.
I'm just pleased. I don't want to focus on myself, Daggers. I'm just pleased that we've moved you from a pit of despair ahead of opening weekend to a Baker Mayfield advocate by the end of the season.
Let's bake, baby! Let's bake!
I just needed to hear it one more time. Daggers, it's been a blast as always.
Great to speak to you.
Take care. Cheers, Daggers. And to everybody else, enjoy a few weeks away. Look, there's plenty to come this off-season, and we'll be keeping abreast of it as well. But for now, so long, everybody.
Subscribe to Graves on Gridiron wherever you listen to podcasts. And keep up to date with the latest on Twitter. Search for Richard Graves 1. That's Richard Graves, the number 1.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.